this meeting of the Transportation Policy and Planning Board to order, July 15th, 2020. First thing we'll do is our standard virtual meeting opening script from our tech facilitator.
All right, this one's a little bit different with mute control, and we don't have attendees, so I'm going to do a condensed version. If you wish to speak, raise your hand. Your hand, you will be called on in the order that you've raised your hand. Staff, if you speak, if capable, please turn on your camera when speaking. If you raise your hand, it is easier for the facilitator and the chair to select you once you've raised your hand, so we can use mute and unmute controls. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jesse. Next, we'll proceed to our roll call, and the clerk will call the roll.
Grant Foster.
Had a hard time hearing you, Alder Foster.
I'm here.
Keith Berman.
Present.
Rebecca Kemble.
Here.
Eric Sundquist.
Here.
Robert Burke.
Present.
Chris McCahill.
Here.
Thomas Wilson.
Present.
Baltazar de Santana.
Present.
Margaret Bergamini. Badri Lankella.
Here.
Thank you, Anne. So because Margaret's not here yet, Badri, you will be voting on any votes that we do take until if and when she does arrive. So our first item is approval of minutes. Are there any? Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes from our July 6, 2020 meeting? Please raise your hand if you have any issues. Okay. Is there a motion to approve?
This is Robert. I would make a motion to approve the minutes.
Moved by Robert. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Badri. Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving last meeting's minutes say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no. All right, the chair believes that's unanimous. If you said no, raise your hand. I might not have heard you. Seeing no hand raisers, we're moving on. We do not have any registrants for public comment for items not on the agenda. Anne, has that changed since we spoke before the meeting? Okay. Disclosures and recusals. Are there any communications, disclosures, or recusals from members of the board? Please use the hand raise feature. Seeing none, move on to our first item, item 3 on the agenda, Legistar 61351, Transportation Department Capital Budget. Are you on here someplace? I can't see. All right, here we go. You're still muted, Tom. There we go.
All right, and so here we go. Yes, I think the way we'll do this, is Sabrina on?
I see her, yeah.
Okay, she is. Let's have Sabrina and then Yang present, and then Justin and I will present, because Justin's budget and transportation's budget are closely linked because of the BRT project. So Sabrina, maybe you would share your screen.
Sure.
All right, can folks see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, this year's budget for Park Utility is pretty straightforward. For 2021, we just have the vehicle replacement program. That is funding for our city vehicles on a 10-year cycle, replacement cycle. So that's $203,000 is our estimated budget for 2021. Also, 2023 and 2024 is the scheduled Lake Street replacement project. That is no changes for that at this point. Certainly as we get closer and into some preliminary design, there could be some adjustments to that budgeted number, which was based on opinion of probable cost. That was done several years ago. So as we get a little bit more detail, there are potential changes to that number. But at this point, the estimated amount is for design 2023 of that 1.2 million, and then construction beginning in 2024. There's also some uncertainty at this point whether additional funding sources may be needed for that project. Typically, we fund our projects, including garage replacement projects, with reserves. As a result of COVID-19 impacts and significant reduction in revenue and occupancy, we are expecting to use some of that reserve balance this year as well as next year, rather than generating roughly 4 to 5 million each year. So some significant financial impacts that will impact our reserves going forward and as we look at funding that project. And with that, I'll open it up for any questions from folks.
Sabrina, do you mind if I add on a little bit regarding the request for proposals from economic development?
Sure.
Yeah, I think there's often been thought that this would not be a bad location and actually could be a very good location for an intercity bus terminal. Right now, it's very close to the Union, where a lot of students happen. Currently, we relocated the intercity bus terminal to Lake Street. That was something that was voted on by this board, but it was always kind of understood that it would be a temporary location. So right now, economic development is putting out the request for proposal, kind of a PPP arrangement where it could be a development that's structured maybe similar to the Wilson Street Garage, except better, because that hasn't gone so smoothly, where, the air rights would be available for a developer. The garage itself would be part of the parking utility, but then maybe portions of the garage could serve as, or just outside the garage could serve as the intercity bus terminal. And so we're looking at a way to perhaps leverage, perhaps there could be some TIF monies that are involved because we have, property value increase and increment. It's a good location for, for an intercity bus terminal, and we have this replacement need as well. So, so I just thought we would give an update on that so that the board is aware that that is going out.
All right, thank you, Sabrina and Tom. Any immediate questions from board members? We can also ask after the other staff members are done. Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thanks. Just wanted to ask Sabrina, is the vehicle program for parking, is that managed by Fleet Services or do you handle that internally?
We do work through Fleet on the procurement and selection of vehicles.
Wonderful, thank you. And a quick comment, I guess, for both Sabrina and Tom related to the potential for that Lake Street ramp to be to serve other purposes. I would maybe also include the thinking around almost sort of a secondary bike center, kind of similar to what we did again with Judge Doyle, but perhaps even in conjunction with UW. They have a sort of a service area in the Helen C. White garage, and I know that UW has really struggled finding actual just physical space to put as much bike parking as they really need, and they're beyond capacity. So it might be worth once we get someone in the design phases, just keep that in mind, that there might be some value to really consider some additional bike capacities in that garage as well.
Here's a question for you, because we are writing the proposal, or we aren't, but economic development is now. The bike center just next door is a beautiful facility, but it will have fees associated with it. Are you thinking more of outdoor type parking, or are you thinking of something that is indoor and might have a subscription service or something like that?
Yeah, haven't thought through it to that degree, just knowing that there's, I think overall there's a need for additional capacity for bike parking, even on State Street itself. I think if you look at, the challenges of fitting in outdoor seating and everything else. So I think imagining allocation of some of the space for bike parking would be good to have as part of the proposal.
Certainly, and I would just add too that with our new garages, bike parking is included in the design, but certainly we'll look at whether additional bike parking at that location above kind of our standard design would need to be included there. So thanks for the comment.
Great, thank you.
All right, we can move on to our next presenter then. Unless there are other immediate questions, I'm seeing none. So if more come up, you can ask afterward. I'm sorry, Tom, who did you say was going to be Oliver Yang?
Yeah, I think I'll be the next. Good evening, everyone. So since our capital program is a little bit more complicated, so I will use a different approach than Sabrina. I will start with giving some of the background information, and then I will talk about some numbers as well. But overall, our 2021 budget requests, I think, are quite ambitious and bold. We have taken careful considerations about the city's fiscal situations that we are in right now, especially the dire impact from COVID-19. So we want to really focus on upgrade existing facilities where maintenance and repairs has become too costly to sustain. But we really want to seize the opportunity to improve public safety, transporting equity, and also sustainability. So we actually our budget request this year is quite large for the next 2 years, much larger than the previous years. It's 2 or 3 times the size as we asked before. But those really have good reasons. Specifically, we added the 3 programs that we feel like those should be prioritized. The first new program is the Vision Zero program. We want an annual program to support our Vision Zero initiative, which I want to thank the board for being heavily involved and providing guidance on that. And we're looking forward to working with the board in the coming years. We feel like that's a priority, so we added that project in. We're also proposing a project to get more temporary traffic control devices and also some lighting equipment. We were in situations that we want to test new traffic control configurations, but we don't have enough device, so this will help that. Also, this will help us to respond to emerging situations such as COVID-19 in our Share Streets program, and we responded to protests because of some of that, we have to delay some of our shared streets program. We just don't have enough devices. And this week we're responding to the Highlight Drive area, for incidents over there. So we feel like to get a more traffic control device would be tremendously helpful. By far the largest project we're proposing for 2021-2022 is a citywide conversion project for almost all the city-owned and maintained LED streetlights. We want to convert the old lights to all new LED energy efficient lights, and we want really to cut into the operating cost. Right now, we are paying $1.2 to $1.3 million operating cost every year just for electricity. So we want to make some capital investment, and we feel like some of those investments will pay back in a very short time frame. So that's three new programs we are proposing. We also have for other existing core programs we want to maintain. Those are streetlight installation, traffic signal installation, public safety radio system. That's for the city's 911 radio communication system. This one actually is a very small program right now, $50,000 a year, just take care of some minor equipment needs. Also a traffic safety infrastructure program. Again, that's a relatively small program, $50,000, so enabling us to respond to different safety situations that we have to respond right away. And we, as mentioned, we added three new programs. For ranking of them, prioritize of them. I think to kind of make sure we get the core program covered. I and others on the team kind of put the new programs down below. Doesn't mean those should be ranked lower. Actually, I think some of those are actually should have quite a high priority. I should point out because of budget situation, we hope that all the three programs can be funded, but we also are prepared to potentially scale back or eliminate some of the funds for any of these three programs. So we would like to take advantage of as much funds as we can get to take advantage of the most of benefits we can get. We think that all the three programs are very cost effective. So should be really good investment for the community, even though we are very tight on budget. I also want to quickly mention about how COVID-19 impacted us in terms of capital on the capital side. It has a lot of impact on our operations, but luckily for capital projects, so far it hasn't impacted our capital projects that much. We still are mostly on track with most of our capital improvement projects. So staff is working hard on that. However, though, as I mentioned, we found that we ran out of equipment when we respond to multiple emergencies, COVID-19 protests and other things. So we, that's a constraint that we hope to improve with this budget request. Another important issue we also noticed is that more and more we realized the vulnerability of our radio communication system for our first responders. We observed how important it is to keep the vital communication open and reliable for different users through COVID-19 emergency. and other emergencies, as we recently experienced. With recent firebomb attack on City County building, and also there's more risk of hackers attack the public's communication infrastructure. We feel like there are important needs need to be addressed. So right now we don't have a backup system. So if we lose the City County building, the whole system will be down, which will be quite troublesome. We also our maintenance contract will also expire by end of the year. We have been working with finance on that. The current the industry is shifting from a kind of a system as a service model instead of you spend $10-20 million in 1 year to get a new system, and then you don't spend any money for the next 10-15 years, and you spend another $30 million to build another new system. So that is not recommended. The industry recommends that always keep the system current, spend a little bit money every year, keep your software patched so that you block all the potential security holes. And actually, if you don't do that, when something happens, they're not going to be able to support you, and it's going to be you have an interruption to services, and it's going to be very costly for them to get a new system to you. So we are kind of adapting to that and working with the finance on potential, hopefully partly capital project, but maybe mostly operating project, so that we always keep the system up to date and avoid spending $20 million in a particular year to get a brand new system. So that's kind of quick overview. I also want to talk a little about the numbers, but I think this graph is very telling. Right now in 2020 we are our budget as this line over here, a little bit under $1.6 million yearly operating cost. We have been operating at that level for many years. Our 2022 budget really jumps to almost $4 million in 2021 and also in 2022. Those are mainly because those three projects I mentioned, especially the citywide LED street lighting conversion project. We feel like we did some analysis. Even though we're proposing to spend $1.5 million in 2021 and $2 million in 2022 to replace all of them, we're looking at getting back all those investments in 7 to 10 years, and it will be much more environmentally friendly as well, as we save a lot of energy. And hopefully, from there, we're going to see significant drop on the capital spending from our division, and almost back to normal. We didn't show the impact to operating budget here, but we expect a significant drop on our operating budget by doing a street lighting conversion project. We think on a conservative estimate, it probably save us a little bit over $500,000 a year just in electricity cost. And it also saves some cost for staff to go out to replace the burn bulbs. For regular high pressure sodium bulbs, the lifespan is 1 to 2 years. Every 1 to 2 years, you have to replace it. For LED, it lasts much longer, 10 years plus. You don't have to touch it. So that should be a major consideration. I think that graph really provides a big really good overview of the situation about the numbers. I think I will stop over there, and I'm happy to take any questions or providing more information as board members wants to know. Thank you.
Thanks, Yang. Are there any board members who'd like to ask questions now? Use the hand raise feature. All right, seeing none, we'll move on to our next presenter.
Good afternoon, everyone, or I guess evening at this point. All right, is everyone able to see that? Okay. So I guess first, I'll preface by saying I'm not really proposing anything to any new projects necessarily in Metro's budget, but there is a fair bit of shuffling things around. And so I'll explain those. I'll start with the ones that are relatively unchanged. So first, the fourth line item you see in this table is the facility repairs and improvements. That's our 1101 East Washington facility. I am not proposing to make any changes to that compared to what the 2020 CIP was. Those improvements are desperately needed in our facility. Has been, I would say, a lot of these projects have been deferred for a long time, and we're reckoning with that now. And so I strongly suggest we continue with those as currently planned. The fifth line item there is the transit system upgrades. That is largely small support vehicles and lifts and things like that. The one big change there is that previously our technology upgrade project was kind of rolled into that line item. And so for this year, we've actually broken that out as a separate line item. It's the transit technology system, which is the second line there. Otherwise, those dollar amounts have not really changed substantively from last year's SIP. The transit technology system project is shown there at $10 million for next year. That previously was $4 million within the transit system upgrades project. The scope of that project is really intended to cover an upgrade of most of our technology systems here at Metro. And I've gone through a major overhaul of many of those systems at my previous system in Indianapolis. $4 million is not sufficient to cover that cost. I'll just be straight with you. And so I felt 10 million was much more appropriate for the scope of work that needs to be done. This is not something I feel like we can defer either. We are woefully behind on technology here at Metro. I think there's a lot of improvements that need to be made to upgrade and have better functionality for our riders and more efficiency for our operations. But potentially even more importantly, most of those systems that we're running right now are well beyond their support. And so many of them are kind of duct taped and band-aid together, and eventually they will break. And we don't really have strong support, or even the vendors are not really supporting those platforms anymore because they are so old. And so I feel like this is a very important investment to make. And I think it will pay dividends for us both financially in the long term as well as in our service. Now, obviously, $6 million increase is not something that we can handle in our overall budget, especially this year. And so because of that, the first line item there, the Metro satellite bus facility, in last year's CIP, that was listed at $16 million for 2021. I'm proposing to reduce that to 10 million. And so between those two projects, it's a net zero. That is not just me slashing money from that budget. We have taken a closer look at that project and really attempted to kind of value engineer things to where we can get a functional facility that meets our needs for a lower cost. I think it also, we basically are able to rearrange the way that the buses are arranged in the building so that we don't have to do nearly as much work to the exterior of the building or the grounds around it. And so we're able to save a lot of cost there by not having to do that work. And I think probably at not a big reduction in functionality for us. So in terms of overall expenditures on those items, it's a net zero. The other thing that is not really explicitly shown here is that in our 2020 budget, we had $12 million for that satellite bus facility. And that was intended to all be local borrowing. In the meantime, we have received a federal competitive grant through the FTA for about $7 million that would be applied towards that project. And so that would reduce, on net, reduce our borrowing by $7 million. And then the middle line item there, the transit coaches diesel, that is probably the most complex one. And I'll explain that. And that's why Tom wanted to go right after me. So you'll notice that is zeroed out in my budget, in Metro's budget for 2021, 22, 23, and 24. That does not mean we will not be buying buses. What we are proposing here is actually to shift those dollars into the BRT project and essentially accomplish our bus replacement through the BRT project. What that does for us is it gives us the advantage of leveraging additional federal match against our project. So we are proposing to move both the federal grants and the local portion that was attributed to the buses in 21 through 24, move all of that money into the BRT project, increase the total cost of the BRT project, but also add a bunch of additional buses into the BRT project. And I think overall, this significantly improves our outlook financially for the BRT project. It also allows us to fund some additional services as part of the BRT project, such as buses running along what would be the future north-south BRT line. So essentially going between the north and south transfer points. Allows a route to be running there frequently every 15 minutes using BRT buses, whereas the infrastructure for the north-south BRT would eventually come in and be built as part of a later project, but at least the service and the buses are already running in that corridor. So it allows us to reduce some of the cost of that future project, which probably from a federal standpoint would be less competitive. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions on this. Otherwise, I can turn it over to Tom, who can talk more about the BRT project.
It's like Alder Kemble, go ahead.
Yeah, the $12 million in this year's capital budget for the satellite bus facility, what exactly was that for?
So in our budget, in the Metro budget, it was not specifically tabbed for any site. It was just for a satellite bus, for purchase and modification of a satellite bus facility. However, the grant that was awarded is tied by name to the Oscar Mayer site, which is, I know there's been a lot of discussion around that particular site.
And where are we at with negotiations on the purchase in terms of a purchase price? I mean, I've heard things between 7.5 million and up and 11 million. And where are we at with that?
Might let Tom weigh in on that one. I know that we are actively talking about different scopes of work that they'll do before closing. So I don't know that we have an actual dollar amount defined, but I think for the entirety of the parcel, it was something in the 10 million range. Tom, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'm going to say that I don't think I can give away or discuss numbers right now. I think generally on the value of the property, there's kind of a basic agreement between our appraisal and Reich Raven and what they're thinking the value of the property is. I think what's the more complicated portion is correctly addressing the environmental concerns and structuring the agreement so that the city is not incurring additional risk. Council, and maybe give a thank you to the council for allowing us to enlist an environmental attorney. I have not met him, but everyone that I have talked to who has been involved in the negotiations says he is excellent. He's top notch. And so he is, they had an interaction meeting yesterday with their environmental attorney. And so it's a complicated process. I think probably if you think about it, any brownfield developments, how would it not be complicated, right? It's just going to be. So I am, we are actually developing a fact sheet. I think there's a lot of different information that's going around out there. What kind of contamination, where is it going, who's responsible, all that. We are developing a fact sheet, and we'd like to get together with alders that are interested and kind of go through it. We might be able to have our environmental attorney there too. That would be of use, perhaps. I would have to. We'll have to probably understand the noticing. It'll be different because it's the noticing requirements, and then the ability to perhaps go into closed session so that some of these things might be more part of the negotiations. I'm not as familiar with that whole process as our real estate section is.
So can you say what our appraisal came out to and then what Reich Rabin thinks the value is? Can you say that range?
No, but I can say that they're really close. Matt Wachter, you could ask Matt Wachter and he might be able, I just don't know what I can say in the negotiations and what I can't. But I'm going to say that I do not think the purchase price will be the sticking point. I think it will, if there's a sticking point, it will be in other areas on how we address the risk associated with the parcel. That's my impression right now with the discussions.
Okay, thank you. And then just back to Justin, clarifying that the 10 million for 2021 is just for improvements to the site?
Correct. Yep. So our expectation is that the 12 million that was allocated in last year's or in 2020's budget would cover the purchase, and that this would be for upgrades to make it more functional for us.
And then could you talk a little bit about the transit technology system that you're thinking of purchasing for that 10 million?
Yeah, so there's
exactly what it does and what we're talking about.
Yeah, so there's several components. We actually have an RFI, request for information, out right now on the street, so we're hoping to get vendor interest. The core functionality is kind of the GPS-based system that our dispatch uses to communicate and convey information to and from the drivers out on the street. That also populates real-time arrival information, schedule adherence, all the data collection. It also does the passenger counting, so we know where passengers are boarding the bus. And then there's a few other components that we're asking for, either components again that we have that are beyond useful life, or we don't have and we think are a value add to the organization. So one is additional improvements in fare collection system, so mobile payments, potentially tap card systems, and account-based systems where you can reload an account with cash, at a third-party vendor, things like that. there are more data analysis tools, again, that will allow us to compare actual running times against schedules so that we can make adjustments in the schedules and know where those adjustments need to be made. That'll help us improve our on-time performance going forward and potentially help us, take a bus out of service where maybe it's not needed, where there's a little extra running time. We might be able to save some money. And then there's a series of kind of fleet and garage management tools. So one would be vehicle analytics. Again, if one of our buses has an issue while out in the field, it would be able to send a remote signal to our garage staff so that they know to pull that garage out of service or that bus out of service, or to inspect it when it comes back out of service. Oftentimes, when there are major issues that cause the bus to break down and have to be towed back in, which is very expensive for a vehicle that size, there are other warning signs that happen in the lead up to that, right? Oil pressure is going up. We know that something's going to blow, and so we can, by getting alerts on that sort of stuff in real time, we can save an awful lot of money in maintenance costs and towing costs, as well as not having to, take a bus out of service in the middle of its route. We can wait till the end of the route and then take it out of service. There's a series of other maintenance tracking softwares, again, that can allow us to have better controls over when certain performance or certain enhancements or maintenance activities are being done on buses, so that we can better predict when other repairs need to be made in the future. And then we spend, seems kind of silly, but we have 200 buses sometimes in this facility. It's a bit of a game of Jenga to figure out where those buses are and get the right ones out. And so there's kind of garage tracking softwares that allow us to pull up a map and know in real time where each bus is in the facility. And so that we can pull the right one out rather than kind of walking around and trying to find it. And so that's kind of a nutshell. It's a laundry list. There's a lot of things included in these systems, but that's hopefully gives you a good overview.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm going to add one note to the Oscar Mayer. So Justin actually, in 2020 SIP for 2021, we had 16 million for a Metro satellite bus facility. So he's actually, he probably mentioned this, I might not have heard it, but so he's through some value engineering, he's reduced that amount by $6 million. He's reoriented the way the buses are. And I think I'm just going to say right size the project, so that it's a more reasonable project than previously scoped.
Okay, Alder Foster, you're up next.
Thank you. No questions, but just wanted to say nice work with this, Justin. I really appreciate it. Clearly, we've had some deficits in our technology program for a while. I know you and I have talked about those. You shared a little bit here as well. And I'm thinking maybe at a future meeting sometime, it might be good to get a little bit deeper dive into kind of the extent of what we're looking at, and just to get a better sense of some of the decisions that we'll have to make in terms of those different technologies that we're pursuing. But very supportive of making that investment. And I really appreciate you finding the savings in the satellite facility to be able to cover that. So nice work with that. And also, I think the plan to move the bus purchase to the BRT program, which I think Tom will probably discuss in his presentation, that again makes a lot of sense, and hopefully does make us more competitive for the grant. So just thanks for all your work on it.
Certainly. Thanks. Thanks, Alder Foster. I believe, Tom, you're up next. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I'll start sharing. I'm gonna start my share the letter rather than from the spreadsheet. As mentioned, it's helpful to have Justin here because he has built a BRT system. So the major change to the BRT system is that we moved about $50 million of bus purchases from Metro's budget to the Transportation East-West BRT project. In doing that, we transferred about $17 million of federal, as well as $14 million of Metro non-GFO general obligation borrowing. It increases the East-West BRT budget by $18 million. Okay, so it's $18 million more, and it increases the net amount of borrowing by $9 million. But as Justin has said, if you look at who tends to get, the small starts grants, mostly, with the one exception being, I'm going to say the one exception is Milwaukee, because we're in a battleground state, right? They basically have a 50% local match, but it's not necessarily 50% local money. It's just 50% non-CIG or small starts money. And so we're piecing together state and federal monies from different parts to come up with 50% that are not CIG monies. So that what that does is it increases the local match from 25% to 50%. So this really substantially increases our chances of qualifying or having a satisfactory rating for the grant criteria. We also moved most of the money. We had distributed the money between 2022 and 2023. We are now understanding that FTA likes to have the money committed, even if you are not intending to expend it that year. Otherwise, it's just planned money and it doesn't really count. So we moved our money forward to 2022 so that all of it could be committed in the eyes of the FTA. We will not be spending that money in 2022. It'll be distributed through 2023 and portion into 2024. So that's the biggest change. A smaller change was we had been able to obtain $160,000 to perform a complete street study that develops a modal hierarchy in the street typology that assigns priority modes within our street network. It seems as though we also have a need to understand what priority distributed green infrastructure and trees have in our street structure. So when we reconstruct the street, the stormwater trump a certain type of accommodation. And so we went out for an RFP. I believe that at the next TPB meeting, you'll be voting on the selection. We selected tool. The RFP had two parts. One was a part to do kind of the modal hierarchy in the street network typology. And then there's a second part that goes into the distributed green infrastructure and tree canopy. And I think the estimate for that is about 125. We asked for 140 in case there were, let's say, amendments or certain areas of the contract cost more than anticipated. It would be in the budget. So those are the two main factors. If we look at what it looks like, the green is the adopted budget. So here you can see how the green was in last year's SIP. The blue represents our request. So you can see we added to our request, and that's mostly in the buses so that we can come up with a 50% non-CIG match. And then you can also see in 2023, we don't have any money because we want to show to the FGA that we're fully committed. I'm also going to make a mention that those buses, while they will support the East-West BRT, some of those buses provide kind of trunk lines along the south and north corridor, so that we actually have the BRT buses are actually will also serve the north and south corridor, and so we'll have greater frequencies on the north and south corridors, and I think that's probably a worthwhile discussion for a different meeting, perhaps.
All right, thanks, Tom. If board members have questions or comments, please raise your hands. Eric, you're up first. Go ahead.
So first, I just want to echo what Alder Foster said in recognition and thanks for the creative thinking and improvement of the BRT grant and the syncing up of these two budgets. It's all awesome, and I really appreciate all the thinking behind it. I had heard word on the street that there might be a way to also improve our non-federal or non-small starts match by bringing the University Avenue project into the fold, maybe with bus lanes on University Avenue, which would also obviously improve the performance of the BRT, not really BRT in that corridor. Is that anything?
I think I'll answer that. We are and have investigating that. The University Avenue project is a complicated project in that we also need, we have multiple entities that have to all agree on the same thing. So the Village of Short Hills, like, basically it's three entities, but some will say it's more, but the Village of Short Hills, City of Madison, and the VA have to all agree on the same thing. And if one of them doesn't agree, then we don't have a project. It's possible that we could lose our MPO funding allotment if we don't have a project, you know what I mean? Because it has to be spent by a certain time. We've met with the mayor on this, and we plan on doing some exploratory discussions with policymakers of those different entities. Right now, our adopted LPA does not have University Avenue in it. And if we were to submit our small starts with University Avenue in it, then all of a sudden it becomes one of the controlling criteria. And if we don't get all the approvals that we want, then our financial plan doesn't work out. You see what I'm saying? And so I believe the direction that we are going is that we have an adopted LPA. It was adopted in March. That's what we will submit in our small starts evaluation. We will explore this other option in August, September, October. And like I said, it takes all three parties really have to kind of agree. It can't just be one or two. It has to, all three have to be able to agree. And if all three agreed and that's the direction we went, then in August of 2021, we would amend our application. I think that's the direction we're going right now.
Okay, thanks. That's really interesting and encouraging. I personally think that it would, it kind of like elevates this BRT into the realm of real, true BRT. If we can accomplish that, I realize that it will, there will be impediments. So I'd be really supportive of it and eager to try to help in any way I could, or maybe I don't know if a TPPB resolution would help at all. Whatever, if there's anything that opponents of that approach could need from a body like this, I'd be highly motivated to try to help.
Yeah, it's complicated because the city of Madison might not. Every municipality has their own jurisdiction, and they and they like to make their own decisions, right? And so we have to figure out how that all happens. And then the federal government with the VA is even harder. I mean, they are. So, I think, like I said, there's about 5 key stakeholders that we're going to test the waters with. Right now, because of the way the MPO funding works, the city engineering needs to let that project basically in November of 2021, or else, the whole MPO area has the allotment push, the next allotment for the 25-26 years to get pushed back. So it's complicated. But we are exploring it. So I'm just going to say we're exploring it. But we don't want the BRT project to be contingent upon that success, if you know what I mean. Otherwise, then our financial plan that we submit doesn't really work.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to say Justin is more optimistic about that option, and I'm more cautious about that option. Just so if you, you want to know our just because of the complications of getting all the entities to agree. So. Okay. Can I add one caveat to this budget as well?
Yeah, go ahead.
We just received an updated estimate of the BRT project from our consultants about a week ago. It was higher than we anticipated. We've looked at different measures, and Justin in particular, that we can reduce the cost. And I think we are able to do that. But we will probably want whatever we submit in our application August 28th to match the capital budget. And so we might have an adjustment with finance just to make sure that, A, in our capital budget, when FTA looks at it, matches B in our submittal. Otherwise, it's difficult to. Now, that being said, we also acknowledge that ultimately this is the council's decision in November, and the council may choose to change these numbers, and that's their prerogative. But to the extent we can, we'd like our application to match at least the proposed budget.
All right, thanks, Tom. Thanks, Eric. Alder Foster, you're up next.
Thank you. And yeah, quickly on the University Avenue, I guess I would be maybe optimistic and cautious, but echo what Eric was saying in terms of whatever we can do to support. I think Transportation Commission was very much thinking about a dedicated bus lane with that project early on and asked a lot around that. So I think there is support here locally around looking at that again. My other quick comment was around the Complete Streets line item, and I don't know, maybe this was already looked at, but if not, it might be worth just having finance take a look at the stormwater utility and or the forestry special charge covering some or all of that, since the additional is really sort of more around those two elements than it is around transportation.
Yeah, I've actually asked both Charlie and Greg if I could have some of that money. And Charlie says that the forestry special charge is solely used for operating budget expenses. Greg did not perhaps see as much value in this, but perhaps he's since looked at the scope. Perhaps he'll gain some more interest in that. We still have a very good project without the $140,000. The $140,000 allows us to just add two more components so that it's looked at as a whole rather than as a piece.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm very supportive. I think it's the right idea. And I guess I'm thinking of it really just more, not even that Charlie or Greg should be advocating for this as part of their budgets, but rather if the council is supportive of this, just from an accounting perspective, it would seem to make sense to allocate them to those utilities rather than just through the general fund. But yes, maybe just mention that to Dave Schmidt at some point. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Alder Foster. Are there any further questions? Alder Foster, your hand's back up. Oh, never mind, it's down again. All right, any further questions for staff? Any further comments or discussion? So this is put on as an information item. Typically we do those later on the agenda. The reason it was placed first is so that staff members could drop off the meeting afterward and not have to wait until the end. I see your hand up again, Alder Foster. Go ahead if you're ready.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, so this was great, appreciated, and obviously COVID, shifted the budget work this year. I guess I'm curious what the timeline is for the operating budget, and if we have an opportunity to see that prior to submission, or if it would again be after it's already submitted.
It's submitted, and I don't know. I don't think I've seen it published yet. I want to say most of us weren't given the opportunity to add anything. We were asked basically a cost to continue and then a way to reduce by 5%. And I'm not quite sure how finance or the mayor's office is going to address that.
Yeah, so maybe at our next meeting, we could take a look at that. And for future years, I think it would be great to get a presentation here. I believe library, for example, I think they brought the proposal to the library board, for review and comment before submitting. I think that would be a good approach where we've got a timeline that can accommodate it. So maybe looking at that for next year. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions, comments, or discussion on this item? Seeing none, thank you to all staff members. We'll move on to our next item, number 4 on the agenda, Legistar 61194, a resolution authorizing the mayor and city clerk to enter into a 2-year competitively selected service contract with Jared Walker and Associates for Metro Transit Network Design Study Consulting Services.
Hi, this is Mike Chekvala. So we had a panel of 7 people evaluate the 5 proposals that we received, and the report for that is up on Legistar, and we were prepared to have a recommendation to move forward, and then we realized just on this Monday that there's a 6th proposal that had gotten overlooked. And so what we would like to do is postpone this topic until the next meeting so that we can give that 6th proposal its due review.
Alder Kimball, go ahead.
Move referral of this to our next meeting.
So motion, is there a second? Looks like Alder Foster.
be developing a timeline for the ordinance. And then, as Dave mentioned, there would be a discussion and workshop with the Planning Commission where all of these aspects would be discussed in much more detail. The TDM and the parking program is a very important aspect that would need to complement this TOD overlay zone. And finally, there would be a more detailed discussion and revision of parking maximum and minimum. And this was just an introduction to what we would need to look at. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharuvi. Are there any questions? Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, just I guess generally to answer your question, yes, I think we should pursue this. I think it's a good idea. In your timeline, you said a discussion with Plan Commission in September. Is that imagined to be like a joint DPPB Plan Commission session, or can you speak more to what that discussion workshop is?
I might be able.
Or someone.
I might be able to. So Heather has developed 4 workshops with the Planning Commission for this year. So, and they're workshops so that they can work on policy. I think the Planning Commission right now is always reviewing projects and never. And her scheduled land use and transportation workshop is September 28th. And I think it would be fine for people to join that. I'm always afraid of Planning Commission meetings because they always go till 1 in the morning. So I don't know. I don't know if we want to make it a joint meeting. The TOD currently exists in zoning, so it's actually a Planning Commission. They would be the lead in moving this forward, but it is directly related to the BRT and what we're trying to accomplish as far as mobility. And so it's kind of a point of overlap.
Yep, that makes sense to me. And then I guess just input on the quarter versus half mile. I mean, I think it makes sense to have kind of two layers, whether or not it should be sort of opt-in or if there's just different elements to the 2 areas would be an interesting discussion point in the future. I think we'll also kind of get into this more when we're doing our network analysis. And, I guess I'm sort of on the side of thinking we may need to really rely on more of a kind of a half mile walk shed for our high frequency transit. So, I think it really depends on our kind of the network design that we land on will probably inform how we want to draw the boundaries to the overlay district. And I guess in the same vein, I'd also be interested in really expanding this beyond just the official BRT corridor as well. Again, based on what the network analysis shows us, but if we, design and begin to implement several what I would call arterial bus lines, whether or not they're technically BRT or not, I think we'd really want to think about extending a TOD along all of those major routes, pretty much anywhere we have high frequency service, and because these are land use regulations, I think as soon as we figure that out, as soon as we have a plan, we should really think about putting them in there because it obviously takes a number of years for land acquisitions and development projects to happen. So, once we land on where our higher capacity transit corridors are going to be, we should really, I think, get things in place in the ordinance so that we can start signaling to developers and get the kind of development that we're looking for. So thank you for bringing this, and it's exciting work.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Any further questions? Comments, discussion? Okay, thank you again, Sharuvi, for an excellent presentation. Oh, Eric, I see your hand just raised up. Go ahead.
Yeah, just one small thing, and it was just Sharuvi mentioned it in passing on the parking. Obviously, what the appropriate maximum and minimum is will be like kind of the key thing in this, or at least one of the key things. And that gets down a rabbit hole that we don't want to get down right now, because officially minimums aren't required in a lot of cases, but in practice they are, because whenever there's a conditional use, all kinds of things can come out. So that'll be, if people have a stomach for that, that'll be the kind of thing that'll probably come up at this Plan Commission meeting, and certainly probably come back to us. But the one thing that Sharuvi mentioned in passing that I just wanted to, I think the notion of how TIF might come into play is that if you're in the TOD zone, maybe you could not use TIF for parking. It might forbid that use, so that this is increasingly sort of an issue that I've heard. Tom Lynch has brought it up sometimes, that we have this policy goal around trying to reduce auto orientation, but we have these TIF funds that really kind of, they're just skimming off some of the levy really, and is going into subsidized parking, often, not almost always, in the BRT influence area. So that, I think the notion there is that maybe this would be a place to forbid that. And it's just one idea that's out there and doesn't need anybody to react to now, but I think that's where that was coming from.
Could I just throw one other thing out there too, since you brought up parking, particularly when you're looking at some of the peripheral locations where you might apply a TOD overlay. If you are reducing the amount of parking that's provided off-street to support the development, and you want the development, you want the density, but we have to be very mindful of the streets that are surrounding the development and how we regulate that on-street parking, because as many places are experiencing, if you don't provide the parking or you charge for it, people will find a way to drive to the general location, park on the street, then you've got a different sort of neighborhood issue. So RP3 and how you manage on-street parking is going to be part of the mix too.
Thank you, Dave. Are there any further comments, questions, or discussion? Sharuvi, I think we maybe answered a little bit of the main question about the overlay. Is there anything this evening that you'd like yet from the board before we move on? All right. Thank you again for the presentation.
Can I make a thing?
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Sharuvi's been an intern with us for about 2 months, maybe 2.5, maybe it seems like 4 months maybe, huh? And she's done a lot of good work. I think her term is up in a week or so. So she's really going to be handing the football to us and city staff and the like. And we want to keep both moving, the TOD overlay, but also the TDM. I think any of you at the council meeting last night realize how important it is for us just to get a consistent policy regarding TDM that's enforceable and just works, right? And so I want to thank Sharuvi for really excellent work. And I'm going to promise you we are going to move forward on these issues. So, thank you.
Thank you. Glad to know.
Yes, thank you again from certainly from me, and I think from all of us. I'm seeing a lot of clapping and waving in the videos. So thanks again, Sharuvi. All right, then we will move on to our next item. Number 6, Legistar 61350, Transportation Demand Management Purpose Statement. As you will hopefully recall, this really came from our last meeting where we were talking about the draft purpose statement from the other presentation that was put together, I think, by Sharuvi. And that draft purpose statement was the Madison Tdm program primarily seeks to mitigate system-wide traffic VMT, but also seeks to reduce negative localized traffic impacts from and then it has suggestions, employment centers, new developments. And so we were kind of working on maybe improving that language. There it is.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead, Sharuvi.
So, right, this was with Eric, and then I can just read it out. So we revised it to sort of include more positive aspects and benefits to the public. So just reading it out for you. The Madison Tdm program seeks to mitigate travel delay, air emissions, economic cost, and public safety impacts of system-wide traffic resulting from major land use changes by providing sustainable transportation choices, infrastructure, and services. Where land use changes create significant local congestion, the program will target resources to address these impacts. So I think some of the keywords that we've added here are mitigating travel delay, looking at air emissions, economic cost, and public safety impacts, and also providing sustainable transportation choices, because through the TDM program, we're really encouraging people to adopt alternative transportation like transit, walking, and biking. So would appreciate your feedback on this.
Thank you, Cheruvi. All right, so discussion, Alder Kemble.
Yeah, focusing on the target resources. Whose resources and yeah, I guess what resources are we talking about in terms of targeting resources to address impacts? Are they policy resources? Are they, infrastructure resources? Are they?
Eric, feel free to jump in here if you'd like.
What kind of resources?
Yeah, so the resources from this program would come from contributions by the responsible parties, so developers. Traditionally, they would be asked to do things like widen a road, put in a traffic signal, or other things to, quote unquote, improve traffic flow. And instead, we would be asking them to do things that support non-motorized transportation and reduce their employees or their residents or whoever use of the roads. If you recall from the discussion last time, there's a long list of measures that they can pick from. It can be as wide-ranging as on-site daycare, mixed uses that reduce the need for people to travel at all, to creating better bike and ped connections, to providing new transit service or new, transit stops. So the notion here is that those resources, often it'll be directly locally targeted because bus passes go to the people using the building, and that's right. That's local by definition. But if they're improving bike ped connections, theoretically they could throw money into a pot, and something in your district could go to help something all the way across town. This is a notion that we're going to try to make sure that the design of the resources that are being provided are also addressing not just the whole VMT system-wide condition, but also are providing localized benefits in terms of whatever physical infrastructure or services that might be available to the public or to the people using that site.
So we're talking about creating a fund?
So yeah, so it gets into the design of the whole program, which we have a flow chart, but I think we weren't going to show tonight, but maybe we could. But so you as a developer, you're going to put in some money to support the program at least a minimal level, to support the staff to run it and people to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do. And then you may put money into a joint fund that supports transit service in a whole activity center, and there's sort of a efficiency and economy of scale there. Or you may choose to do it all on your own. You're like Madison Yards, just do your own thing. So Madison Yards is creating some better pedestrian ways and better, transit stops and things like that the neighborhood could use. So this is just to try to So yeah, it could be either one.
It's just not, it's, I guess I'd like to see a little bit more of who is doing what in this. So this is the program, which I'm assuming is a city program because it's something we're going to develop out of the city.
Well, this is just the purpose that we're asking for right now.
Yeah.
And so we want to take the purpose. If the purpose is agreeable, if you sort of suspend disbelief for the moment and say, somehow these things could be accomplished by getting developers to cooperate, and is this the right way to think about it? And then we can come back to you about who does what and how it all works together.
$10,400.
Is that making sense?
Yeah, I guess, yeah. We can just, yeah.
Okay.
You're muted, Tom, if you're calling on somebody.
Sorry, back and forth. All right, Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I like the first part of it. I think it's really helpful to call out the negative impacts that we're trying to mitigate. I think that's what I hear from constituents when we're looking at new development projects. So I think that really is helpful there. Might want to think of just swapping out instead of air emissions, it's probably air pollution. I'm thinking not really emitting air, but in terms of that last sentence where Alder Kimball had a question, I guess one of my questions is, could we just remove that sentence and do we lose anything, or does it still hold up well? And the reason I'm wondering that is, so the way I read it, it says where land use changes create significant local congestion. My thinking of TDM is that our whole goal is to prevent that from happening. And so it almost sounds like, where we do have congestion, then we're going to target resources to address them. At least in a purpose statement for me, I'd rather focus on having a program that in the development imagining phase, that the things that you mentioned, Eric, on-site daycare, all of the things that I think the goal should be to do a development project that won't result in an increase in congestion. So, and maybe it's just the way I'm reading it, but it sort of looks like it is going to happen, and then we're just going to put resources to try and address them after the fact, which seems, and maybe that is what's going to happen. But so yeah, I guess thoughts on, could we pull that sentence out, or is there something in there that's important to keep?
Well, this was put in there as a response to your comments last time that you wanted something, when you have a new development, you really want something tangible that the people affected by it would actually be able to see and benefit from, as opposed to just generally reducing traffic across the city. So I think it's going to happen either way, because there's kind of, most of the TDM measures are directed to the local project and have the most effect locally, but it's trying to get at that issue that we're not going to take money from developers and throw it into a big fund and then your constituents never see any particular benefit, or they only get the benefit 5 years later when the whole system gets built out.
Okay, that makes sense. That wasn't evident to me the way I was reading it, and maybe that just needs to be a feature of the program that's not in here, but, or I guess the part that's still sticking out for me, like if I were to share this with folks, it looks to me like we are accepting that the land use change is going to create significant local congestion, and I think that's probably not I think the goal at least is to not, right? And it may be some increase, but the goal is that the project's not going to create significant local congestion by doing a number of things. So maybe it's just instead of where it does create congestion, maybe it's something, taking something from the spirit of the first part of it, where there's the potential to add congestion. We're going to target those resources locally to address it or something like that.
Okay, we can think more about that. The expectation isn't that TDM is going to reduce congestion to zero, though. It's, if we have a 300 car parking stall that we're able to get down to 200 because of TDM, it's still a 200 car parking stall, and people are going to be concerned about, maybe we could say impacts or something, because it may not even be congestion. It may be turning movements or, anything like that.
Yeah, impact on the transportation system, right? More people or more jobs or something. I don't think there has to be zero impact, but I don't think we should be telling people that we're prepared to create significant local congestion, because that just sounds like doomsday scenario that they're expecting.
Yep. And the public may never really see this. This is really to guide us in crafting the program more than anything. Just to get a sense of the policymakers and what they want out of it. Before we had that conversation about should it be land uses or employers targeted and all that kind of stuff. So we just want to not get too far down the road without people buying into what this is for.
Yeah, for me, the underlying point of the whole thing should be, this is a program to not add the amount of VMT that would normally come if we didn't do anything. So, it's just really about reducing VMT that would be expected for an equivalent development. And that I think is the heart of it for me, at least.
All right, thanks, Alder Foster. Eric, you were up next in the queue. Did you still want to speak?
Nope.
Okay. Then it's Chris, and then Tom Lynch is the next. So go ahead, Chris.
Thanks. I echo some of the concerns that both alders had about this second piece. And in both versions, I've wrestled with that second part a lot, mainly because I'm having trouble reading it in a way that doesn't just sort of sound like the status quo. If there are traffic impacts, we will mitigate them. It's not really clear that this is something different than that. I think maybe that's part of the purpose, but it sort of just leads us to continuing to do the same sort of traffic capacity fixes that we would have been doing anyway in those cases. So my suggestion would be that the first half that focuses specifically on mitigating VMT is correct. And maybe the solution is to, that second piece is really focusing on addressing the potential traffic impacts through alternative approaches like sustainable transportation, services, paying into these funds we're talking about. I think breaking that out of the first sentence and making it clear that that's what we're talking about by addressing traffic impacts might be helpful. So that would be my first suggestion. And the only other thing I saw in here is I don't know that it helps to add the part that says from major land use changes, just because I'm not sure we've decided that this is going to live in the development review process entirely yet. I think there's possibilities that this could apply to employers across the board. So I don't know that maybe we have decided that that's where we're honing in at this point, but I don't know that it's necessary to say that here.
I actually think that we absolutely need to be pretty clear on that. Otherwise, the design of the program is going to be way different. So we thought, we were just talking about this yesterday or whatever day it was, that we did get a signal that development review or building permits or something were the trigger, and that we should go forward on that. But if it's just a whole different design, if it's a different responsible party. So if that is still unclear to people or unsettled, we should definitely take a pause and settle that.
Okay, that makes sense to me. I guess if this was talking specifically about like this iteration of what we're trying to achieve right now through TDM, I think that makes sense. I don't think that TDM, I was afraid this implied that what TDM meant moving forward, sort of, forever, was that's what this is.
No, this is just to design the ordinance, the program, and potential ordinance.
That's it. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Tom, looks like you'd like to speak, so go ahead.
Yeah, and I just, I'm not a policymaker. I just want to make an observation and point out. I think the first one, the second, on the first purpose statement, it says seeks to reduce negative localized traffic impacts from, and in my mind, and perhaps I was misinterpreting that, that included perhaps parking impacts. You know what I mean? Because sometimes if you do TDM measures, it's like you squeeze a tube and the parking impacts go around. And the second seems to focus more on congestion rather than parking impacts. So I'm just making an observation that it's moved there. That's all I needed to say. So, thanks.
Thank you, Tom. Robert, go ahead.
Okay. I don't know if this is any better, but I agree with what the alders say about the first sentence in the new draft purpose statement seems really positive. The second sentence seems a little problematic. And let me throw out some alternate wording that you can shoot down for multiple reasons, I'm sure. Second sentence, maybe reading something more like, to minimize or avoid negative traffic impact, the program will target locally generated resources to proactively address those impacts. Some of the things I heard people talking about is that, we want to be positive and then try to proactively address impacts before the negative impacts before they happen. And the other thing I heard is that, again, maybe this is getting into too much detail, but that the resources are basically right now we're thinking that it's coming from local developers and that money should be used for those local areas, not taken halfway across the city to deal with some other area. So anyway, that's my first attempt at a second sentence there. Thoughts?
Alder Foster, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I was actually going to just respond to Chris's question and Eric's answer around the focus around our land use component, at least for this next stage, which is what we sort of agreed to last time. I wonder, I'm still hopeful that 5 years from now, we could also be looking at TDM, employer-based TDM interventions, et cetera. I think it makes sense now to focus on the land use component. So perhaps also just to set ourselves up, instead of calling it the Madison Tdm program, maybe we incorporate something about, land use TDM or development TDM or something, just to sort of be clear that that is the focus of this program, and obviously doesn't stop us from doing employer-based TDM at any other point in the future.
So Robert, could you state that second sentence again for me? I didn't get it all down.
Certainly.
Just so the rest of us can hear it again.
Yeah, no, it's good. And I could send it to people as well, but here's what I wrote down. To minimize or avoid negative traffic impact, the program will target locally generated resources to proactively address those impacts.
Thank you.
Sure.
Able to get, I think, all of that. Okay, so are there any further questions or discussion? Alder Kimball.
Maybe just add one word into Robert's thing, those potential impacts.
Potential.
Because if we're proactively addressing, they haven't happened yet, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I like that modification.
Okay. So unless there's further discussion on this at the moment, or for now, is there a motion? Someone like to move approval of some version? It can be a completely separate one if you want it to be. Alder Kimball, go ahead.
I'll move approval of Robert's version.
One question just to clarify, do we want to add, I think it was Alder Foster changing the word air emissions to air pollution?
Yeah.
Or no? Okay. All right, so that's the motion. Is there a second?
This is Robert. I would second that.
Okay, discussion? Chris, go ahead.
So I think what we're talking about is just replacing the second sentence.
Yes, and then proposal. Changing the word changing air emissions to air pollution in the first sentence.
I guess I'm just still, I think I heard it. I still think it's not clear that we're talking about sustainably addressing impacts, like through any means other than what we have done before. I mean, addressing impacts is pretty, not necessarily TDM. That would be my only concern. So I'm not sure. I mean, my suggestion before was to move the clarification of what addressing impacts means into that second sentence. So I don't know. That's how I'm feeling about this right now.
Okay. Alder Foster, go ahead.
I think, Chris, what you're getting at is the concern that addressing the impacts historically has often taken the form of make cars move better so there's not as much congestion. And I think you're wanting to clarify that this is not that. This is not reducing congestion by expanding the roadways. This is specifically that the focus needs to be around the VMT reduction. Is that why you're...
Right. I mean, to Tom Lynch's point, I think this could be interpreted as like somehow adding parking to mitigate the impacts of on-street parking, which is sort of this circular, I don't know, but maybe everyone, and maybe it is clear, and I'm just sort of jaded by seeing this traffic impact stuff too much.
Yeah, I don't, it's hard to say what everybody will read into it. I mean, to me, I think the critical part is it's the first half, that the purpose of the program is focused on VMT reduction. So I think as long as the two pieces don't get detached, I think, but I think your point is a really important one. I guess it's important to make sure, especially staff that will be working on the program and with the program once it's done, that they have clarity around what the expectations are, because that's really where the rubber's going to hit the road.
I am. I feel better about it. Thank you.
Okay. Further discussion on the motion. All right, seeing none, is everyone clear what we're voting on in the language? I'm seeing not. Eric, go ahead.
Did we want to add Grant's suggestion about this being the development TDM so that it implies that there might be other forms of TDM later? I personally think it probably doesn't make a difference, but if it's important to people, because we really just wanted a purpose statement for this program that we're trying to develop right now and not like say anything about future programs. But if that's important and would be a good marker for something useful in the future, we could do that. just raising the question.
That would require an amendment to the motion. Is I'm not seeing any. Oops,
Okay.
Sorry, that was next. If anyone would like to do that, feel free to raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, is everyone clear what we're voting on and what the language is? Anyone like me to repeat it? I don't have the first part in front of me, but I do have the second part. I'll just read it. The second part of was to. Oh, okay, thank you. So the full draft purpose statement, changing that second sentence to minimize or avoid negative traffic impacts. The program will target locally generated resources to proactively address those potential impacts. I think I got all of that right. I didn't write it down very well, but I was able to read most of it. And then changing air emissions to air pollution. Any questions on that? Anyone think that needs to be changed? Okay. All those in favor of approving that language, please unmute yourselves, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The chair believes it's unanimous. If you would like to register a no vote, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing no hands raised, that is unanimous. We'll move on to our next item, number 7 on the agenda, Legistar 61352, Wilson Street Corridor Introduction.
All right. So we are here to talk to you about the corridor study and, oh, great, there we go. And this corridor study includes the entirety of Wilson Street. You can go to the next slide, Gretchen. So basically from Blair Street on East Wilson all the way to where West Wilson ends is what the corridor study area is. So everything, including the part of Broome Street from John Nolan Drive to West Main Street. All right. So just a quick history. If you've been on this committee for a while, heard about this project before. In 2019, we had public information meetings, came up with alternatives, brought it here to the TPPB as well as the Transportation Commission, Board of Public Works. There is a project on 300 West Wilson and that Broome Street segment that is funded. And so originally we had just had kind of a flexible configuration that would work for a variety of alternatives, but the committees felt that it would be more beneficial in the long run to complete this corridor study before anything happened in that corridor. So we are continuing to work on that. And also we heard from the TPPB at that time that really wanted us to look closely at constructing something that worked for the all ages and ability bicyclists. So that's what we have been working on. And now in 2020, and we can go to the next slide. We really started out by meeting with the National Association of City Transportation Officials, NACTO, which many of you know wrote a lot of the guidebooks for sort of the urban street designs. So we've met with them a few times to get their input, since this is definitely an area of transportation design that has been evolving and improving. We also had a lot of stakeholder meetings. There's a lot of interest in this corridor. A lot of different people use it. And so we wanted to have some discussions and really kind of talk about what are their most important features, knowing that there is going to need to be some compromise. And then a couple weeks ago, we had another public information meeting and presented the ideas that we're going to talk about tonight. Now we're here. This is just an informational meeting. We'll be back at the beginning of August for a final decision on the study. We also will be going to the Board of Public Works. And then that 300 block of West Wilson and Broome Street will need to go to the Transportation Commission and Board of Public Works as well. Approval from the Common Council, as you know. The hope is the part that is funded, that we would be able to bid that this year if we can come to an agreement on that design, and then it would be constructed right away at the beginning of next year. All right, so stakeholders, as you can see here, business owners, the terrace, condo associations, the city county building, state government, police department. We also met with the Department of Civil Rights and Access to Independence because we really wanted to talk, being sort of a different kind of facility about the needs of the visual, physical, and cognitive impaired to make sure that we were taking into consideration the issues there. The fire department, since portions of the street do act as a fire lane as well. So we've met them once and we'll be meeting with them again to ensure that what we're proposing meets the needs for safety as well. Safety is what we hear a lot about. People on bikes, people walking, people driving want to be able to see the other users. Delivery, aesthetics, green space, people with disabilities, wayfinding, so many things that are what we heard from that are very important to people. All right, next slide. All right, so in 2019, just to kind of review the original alternatives, we had your basic conventional painted bike lane. We had your painted bike lanes with a contraflow lane in the middle where it's one way, but people desire access on bikes for both ways. And then now what we want to talk about, which is the two-way cycle track through the full corridor, basically. All right, next. So just a little bit about cycle tracks. I think you guys probably are pretty familiar with them, but they do really increase comfort for people of all levels, giving that separation from motor vehicles. Particularly your less confident cyclists are going to ride more. It also gives a clear space for bicyclists that's not the sidewalk, which is something we heard a lot about. It can take a little less space having a two-way than two one-ways. You can pass in a situation like this if it's not busy, and it just generally gives good connectivity for a cyclist. Of course, there are challenges. You obviously have better access to one side of the street than the other. You have to give a lot of thought to the loading and parking, particularly the people with disabilities. We do have some loading zones, so that's important. It needs to be really clear where everyone travels, especially here where we don't have a lot of cycle tracks. In some ways, a one-way street, it can be a little less efficient depending on how the cycle timing works for the signals. And obviously, if you're walking or driving, you might not expect the bike riders coming in that contraflow direction. However, Prospect Park West in Brooklyn, they did a very big study, really good results in terms of crashes going down, speeding going down, sidewalk riding went down. People did not find that the traffic or travel times went up. A lot more people were biking, and at the time they did the study, they had not had any pedestrian injuries. So obviously Brooklyn is very different from Madison, but this was very well done study and showed really positive results. In Portland, at Portland State, they did some research and they found that people tend to use their buffer bicycle lanes more, preferring those over the other options. And, all the time, as I mentioned, cycle track design is getting better. It's changing a little bit how people think about it. Designs are better. And so that's why we were met with NACTO a number of times. Very thrilled to be at NACTO City so that we could get their advice as we moved forward with this study. I think all of you know what a cycle track is, but I threw in a slide just to kind of show a couple things. In the left is that Prospect Park West one where they did the big study. And on the right, I threw that one in. It's Vancouver. It has a raised pedestrian crossing to that floating bus stop, which is something that would be a part of this corridor. All right, and this is currently what we have out there, and Gretchen is going to take over now and walk through the different segments of the corridor.
I will. So I will go through the different sections of Wilson Street and how the proposed cycle track would look like in those different sections. So the first section we have is Wilson Street between Broome and Henry. And right now we're looking east. So if we're standing on Wilson Street and look towards Blair Street, this is how the street would look like. We have 2 travel lanes, 1 travel lane each direction. And then we have a cycle track, which is off-street level. So it would be on the same level as the sidewalk, but separated from the sidewalk by the terrace. And this is a plan view of that 300 block of West Wilson. Highlighted in green is the cycle track, which is off-street, separated from the sidewalk by the terrace. We have 2 lanes, travel lanes each direction, 1 travel lane each direction for the majority of the block. And then as we approach the Henry and Hamilton intersection, we have 2 turning lanes for vehicles to turn onto Henry and Hamilton. As we keep moving east, we have the next section of Wilson Street, which is Wilson from Henry to Butler. And here the cycle track is located on the south side, which is the right side of the screen. But in this section, the cycle track is going to be on street, so on the same level as vehicles. Following the cycle track, we have a 2-foot buffer, and then we have a loading and parking lane. Then we have a travel lane and a lane that's going to be a travel lane during peak hours and a parking lane during off-peak hours. So this lane right here to the left of the screen or north of Wilson Street is going to be parking during the rest of the day except during peak hours. So in the morning and afternoon peak hours, this section of Wilson Street will have 2 travel lanes going westbound, and during off-peak hours, it will only have 1 travel lane going westbound. This same section, after meeting with NACTO, they recommended us to, in locations where we have or are expecting larger loading vehicles to be using this lane, they suggested us to increase the buffer and narrow the cycle track a little bit. So the cycle track would be 9 feet and the buffer would be 3 to allow more room for that transition between the loading and the cycle track. The cycle track in this section would be located on the south side and close to the curb for the majority of the block, but where we do have existing disabled parking, we are planning to maintain that. And for the vehicles to be able to do the loading and unloading of passengers, they need to be next to the curb. So in these locations, the cycle track would shift 8 feet north or to the left, to be able to accommodate the disabled parking. The next section of Wilson Street is between Butler and Blair. Here we currently have parking on both sides. And after a parking occupancy study, the results were that the south side in this section actually had the lowest occupancy of the entire corridor. So the proposal is to remove the parking on the south side or the right side of the screen and be able to provide enough room for the 2-way cycle track on that side and a 3-foot buffer. As we are approaching Blair Street, the current proposal is to take the on-street cycle track to off-street at about the intersection of Franklin Street. So it would go off-street but still separated from the sidewalk. So we have a 5-foot sidewalk and a 10-foot cycle track, and they would cross John Nolan to the east side of John Nolan where there's another path and sidewalk. As part of our corridor study, we also have Broome Street from Main to John Nolan. So between Main Street and Doty Street, we have an on-street protected 2-way cycle track. And right here, we're showing a floating bus stop for the existing bus stop that's currently in that location. For this bus stop to be accessed by all users, we have a crossing from the sidewalk across the terrace and across the cycle track, which would be at the same level. Then we have between Doty Street and Wilson Street on Broome Street. Here we have an off-street 2-way cycle track. So this is going to be very similar to what we have on the 300 block. There's going to be a cycle track and it's going to be separate from the sidewalk. On this block of Broome Street, there are currently 2 northbound lanes, and to be able to accommodate the cycle track, that those 2 lanes were reduced to 1. Right now, we're standing on Broome Street looking towards West Washington Avenue. So the intersection that you see right here with the signals, that is Wilson Street. And this is the east side. So the east sidewalk of Broome Street is currently 6 feet. And the proposal is to make that a 10-foot wide shared use path and relocate the utilities so that they're not in the way of the shared use path. And this is how the intersection of Broome and Wilson would look like with the reduced northbound and eastbound lanes. It has the channelized right turns with the raised crossings on both sides right here to reduce the speeds of the vehicles that are turning right and increase the safety of pedestrians and bicycles, making them more visible to the high volumes of those right turns. We also have proposed for the right turn to be signalized, and that would be getting a flashing yellow arrow. Also, with these islands right here, we have shorter signalized ped and bike crossings. So on the south side, the east side, and the west side, these crossings would be shorter due to these islands right here. Vehicles cannot change lanes at the intersection. So with the location of this specific island, we have designated the rightmost lane to be a right turn only lane. So if this island wasn't there, these vehicles could try to continue going northbound. And then as they're approaching the north side of the intersection, they realize that there's only 1 receiving lane. So they would probably try to merge left or make a sudden right turn to get out of the way. And that would be happening right next to the pedestrians and bicycles using this crossing. So with this island right here, we're making sure that the vehicles on the rightmost lane have to make that right turn onto Wilson. And we have access on north, south, east, and west. Right here, I don't know if you can see my laser, but I'm at the bottom, and I am where the shared use path is. And then the shared use path divides from the sidewalk, so pedestrians can continue east on the sidewalk, and bicycles, if they want to continue east, they can use the off-street cycle track that continues east on Wilson Street. If they want to continue north, they use the raised crossing and then wait for the walk or the signal to cross Wilson Street and then go on the cycle track for bikes and on the sidewalk for pedestrians. If they want to continue west, they wait for the walk or the signal and then cross Broome Street, use the raised crossing. When they get to this corner, pedestrians can continue south or west. And right now, how we're showing it, we have a wide bike ramp. So we are showing it for bikes to be able to continue west and accommodating a 2-way cycle track on the 400 block of West Wilson. This ramp, this opening can also be narrowed to accommodate the buffered bike lane that was approved with the Bassett Street corridor study. But how we're showing it right now, we have a wide bike ramp, a wide opening to be able to accommodate a 2-way cycle track on the 400 block of West Wilson.
All right. So as you can see, this plan for the Blair Street through the 300 block would be an all ages and abilities bicycle facility with that 2-way cycle track. The next block, that 400 block, it does have around 5,000 VMT. So if we were to follow the Bassett Street corridor study that was approved with the buffered bike lane, that probably would not be an all ages and abilities at 5,000 in that situation. Now the next block does fall down to 1,300. So we could have an all ages and abilities. And then the 600 block, we actually don't do counts there. The traffic is very low. That is a dead end. So you could have just a bicycle boulevard and still be all ages and abilities. So, you know, that it's that 400 block with the 5,000 would not be under the there we go.
Sorry.
So, you know, there are some challenges, obviously, with just easily installing a cycle track there. It does have an island. It has kind of a unique geometry, as you can see here. And with the bicycle movements, it would require some changes to that. Obviously, the Bassett Street plan with just a buffer bike lane is an easier build than this would be. But to meet that all ages and ability, we would kind of need to make some changes to this area eventually to build that cycle track. And with that, obviously there's a whole webpage for this corridor study with all the previous information. And these are areas, our contacts, if you have things after tonight that you want to ask, but we can take questions.
Okay, thank you, Gretchen and Renee. So questions or comments? Alder Foster, you're up first. Go ahead.
Thank you. Great work, everyone. It's been a very long and strange trip at Wilson Street project. So it looks like we're getting to a really good outcome. I guess my questions are really around that 400 block that you just mentioned, Renee. And I wonder if someone could talk with engineering and get a sense of kind of what it would take to close that last block. I mean, obviously, you're familiar, but in the sort of larger low stress network, you know, just having that one block gap is really, you know, for everybody coming from basically the west or the south sides coming in on the southwest commuter path. You know, I think they're going to want to go this route, and I'm not all that concerned with, you know, them heading inbound with a buffered bike lane. I mean, obviously a protected would be much better for a lot of folks, but I think particularly not having a westbound connection at all there. I don't, once the 300 and other blocks get built out, I just don't believe anybody's on bike is gonna go down and wait to cross John Nolan at Broome, go down and cross back over again. And so I think what we'll end up seeing is, you know, most people riding on the sidewalk on this block as well. And I think we know the impact to pedestrians there. So I guess it would just be helpful to get a sense of, you know, is this block where does it fall in a reconstruction schedule, and barring a full reconstruction, what would it cost to do, you know, some modifications to that island if that's the sticking point, even to get a sort of a temporary, you know, bollard kind of cycle track installed in this block. And then my only other, I guess, comment would be, if possible, when we have the sort of final report, and I'm sure it would be prepared anyway for the Transportation Commission and Board of Public Works, but a plan view of the kind of the whole thing, just since there are a number of different cross sections. Obviously, just a lot going on, and I think you did a good job of calling out some of those variants, you know, even in the B corridor. But I think to be able to look at it all kind of from a bird's eye view would be helpful. So thank you for all the work on it.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Are there any other questions or comments for staff? Alder Kemble, go ahead.
Just to say thanks so much to staff for bearing with this project for, you know, a year. You wanted it done a year ago. And I really appreciate all the thought and effort that went into it. And I think we came up with a much better result. So thanks.
Thank you, Alder Kemble. Again, any further comments or questions for board members, for staff? Eric Sundquist, go ahead.
Not to be redundant, but when there's really a huge success like this, it deserves rounds of applause. So I'm just going to add my thanks and in agreement to what the two alders just said. This is fantastic work. So thank you very much to staff.
Yes, very, very much well-deserved. Thanks to both of you, or to everyone who's worked on this, I should say.
Yes, there are more people than just us.
Yes. Well, thank you to everyone who worked on it. Thank you for the presentation tonight. Look forward to seeing it again next month. All right, one last time then, any further comments or questions for this item? Seeing none, we'll move on to our last item for the evening, which is item number 8, Legistar 61353, relationship between Transportation Policy and Planning Board, Transportation Commission, and Board of Public Works. Alder Foster. Or Tom, did you want to?
No, if he has something to say, I'm hoping he does.
I was going to actually move that we refer this to our next meeting, and if I get a second, I can explain my rationale there.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Alder Foster.
Oh, if somebody could second it, that would be helpful.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's my bad. Is there a second to refer to next meeting?
Second.
Second by Alder Kemble. Okay, go ahead, Alder Foster.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I have been working on a draft ordinance change specifically for the Transportation Commission ordinance based on a lot of these sort of a lot of the questions related to TC versus Board of Public Works versus TPPB. I shared that draft with Tom Lynch, and we got some good feedback from staff. And we actually just had a meeting this week, and then we've got 2 more meetings with staff because I want to make sure and just get some input from them before sharing that out here. But I think in many ways that that ordinance might be a good starting point for this conversation. So I think rather than getting into it now, we might as well wait and have something a little bit more specific to react to.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Is there any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, please make sure you're unmuted. All those in favor of referring this item to the next meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no. I'm hearing no no's. So if you'd like to register a no vote, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing no hands raised, Chair believes that's not anonymous, unanimous. That's all we have for the evening. So our next meeting is August 3rd. Items for the agenda, it looks like we'll see Wilson Street again as an action item. The 2 items that we referred today, the service contract for the Metro Transit network design, and of course, the one that we just finished up. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, so we could present, we have more work to do on the TDM policy, and so we could present next steps on the TDM policy or have a presentation and discussion on RP3 versus RPO, which would be the most beneficial for the board as we seek to move this forward.
Thoughts? Hand raise feature. I'm seeing a lot of people thinking.
We can go ahead and do the TDM or the RP3. I think the last time we did the TDM, some felt like it was perhaps overwhelming, and where does parking fit in? And so that I just want to be sensitive to how you would like to receive this information, and because you will be making decisions on policy regarding this information, I guess.
Seeing no hands being raised, Tom, why don't we just go ahead and operate under that assumption. If folks come up with something in the next week or two, just email me directly. Don't email the entire board.
It's my choice.
with your thoughts, and then I'll talk to Tom, or you can email Tom as well, both Toms. All right, I'll see everyone hopefully on August 3rd. Anything from anyone else before we are done for the evening? Seeing nothing, you looking for a motion to adjourn?
I'd move adjournment.
Eric, is that a second I'm seeing? All right.
Second.
Discussion? All those seeing none, all those in favor of adjourn, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. We're adjourned. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.